Yoganandaji once said, he said, I can take a few young men of the coarsest type, I can teach them Kriya Yoga, and if they practice it in the way that I teach it, I can make saints of them within a few years. And that is really quite an amazing promise. And yet, I have seen that in all these years that I've lived in Ananda Village. Now, I'll touch a little bit about the theory behind Yogananda's Kriya Yoga practice. There are many different forms of yoga, meditation, and Kriya Yoga through various lineages. What we practice at Ananda Village came directly from Yoganandaji to his direct disciple, Swami Kriyanandaji, who spent 4 very close years, the last 4 years of Yoganandaji's life. Swamiji was with him very closely, and he was, in a sense, commissioned by his guru to take these Kriya Yoga teachings out to the world and to start what he called World Brotherhood colonies, which are these spiritual communities, which really provide a very different way of life for people who want to live a spiritual life. And we have these Ananda colonies, we call them, in several cities in the United States, in Europe. We are starting one in India here that's been going for a while. And these are places where people of like mind, of like attitude, which is positive and energetic and enthusiastic about bringing spirituality into daily life, can band together and pool their resources, pool their energies, and really create an extraordinary way of life. Even though individually many of us don't have the means to do so, but by cooperating together and in a sense pooling our good karma in a way and cooperating and sharing with others, you see these extraordinary communities blossoming, and probably about 7 or 8 of them all over the US and Europe again. And we're starting to look that way in India also, especially with urban community, because people need work and they need to be near where their work is. And they also need to be in a spiritual environment, and that's what Ananda Sangha has provided over the years. Now, what Yoganandaji brought is, you read the chapter in Autobiography of a Yogi about Kriya Yoga, a technique that hastens one's spiritual development. And we teach and practice it the way that our Guru gave it to us. And what Yoganandaji taught is that Kriya Yoga is a comprehensive spiritual path. It's not just some sort of a magical technique that you do a little bit every day and all of a sudden a miracle happens. It takes a foundation of right attitude, of devotion, of the guru-disciple relationship, putting all these things together in a really comprehensive package or a comprehensive whole. Yoganandaji said that success on the spiritual path, and he was really talking about any spiritual path, but he was speaking particularly to Kriya Yogis because, again, this is how we put it together. He said it's 25% is the disciple's part, 25% is the guru's effort on the disciple's behalf, 50% is the grace of God. And so it's not just a matter of techniques, because if it was just a matter of techniques, then you could publish this and people could do it and they would find liberation or moksha. But it's really a matter of developing one's inner self at the same time as practicing techniques. But also, as our gurus taught, Yoganandaji said about the Kriya technique even, he said, Kriya plus devotion works like mathematics. It cannot fail. And Krishna speaks to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. In one of the stanzas, he tells Arjuna to practice yoga, practice these yoga teachings, and offer your heart to me at the same time. And so, what we practice at Ananda Village and Ananda Sangha, and what Yoganandaji gave, is this combination of the science of yoga, the science of yoga techniques, combined with deep devotional self-offering while one is practicing techniques. And also working with the guru. Our gurus are these on the altar here. And when you put it all together in that way, then you see that this is why and how it works. Yoganandaji said that even the 50% that is God's grace, most of it comes through the help of a God-realized master. And this really is the life of those who live the life of Kriya Yoga with Ananda Sangha. And again, the proof is in the practice. The proof is in the change of lives. And I'll just go back and forth between the science and also the living proof and evidence of it. People think that in order to get on the spiritual path and to learn a sacred technique like Kriya, one has to be worthy and ready. In fact, these things were given to those who needed them. Babaji told the Hari Mahashai that he understood the complexities of modern life, and that this yoga science, especially his Kriya technique, was given with that understanding that this world is becoming very complex. And Babaji wasn't talking about Raniket or Calcutta in 1861 when he brought this Kriya technique out. He was talking about Mumbai in 2015 and New York City in 2015. And these are where our urban communities are, in cities where people live and they work in Silicon Valley in the United States and other very high-intensity jobs. Now, Kriya Yoga works in several ways. I'm going to give some examples of what I've seen with the power of Kriya Yoga to change one's life. At Ananda Village, like I said, we've had the ability to observe people over many, many years of practice, and you really see how these things really, really change people. And I'm going to give just one example, but it's really one example among many. I was married for 25 years, and my wife, she left the body about 4 years ago, and she was a Kriya yogi her whole life. And she originally came from the Soviet Union, where even God was almost illegal. You could get arrested for teaching yoga and talking about God at that time when she was there in the Soviet Union. And so this is someone who came from a very atheistic society, who did have sincere spiritual seeking, but she also had a lot of the fears and karmas that I think all of us have to some extent or the other. So she wasn't perfect, far from it, when she came onto this path of Kriya Yoga. Some of her fears included the fear of death, and also an extreme fear of cancer, which her parents both died of. And I think it was her karma I think she knew and understood that this was the karmic direction her life was to take. And I think that's why she had those fears. So she did contract breast cancer, and she fought that for 10 years. And still, she was fighting fears all that time. And it's natural, it's human. For all the great wisdom that we all understand with the spiritual teachings, often the human heart fails to keep up with our philosophical understanding. And so she was fighting this battle with great intensity and will, the very Russian willpower that she had. And finally, in the last couple of years of her life, it was in remission. And it finally, suddenly, just out of the blue, out of nowhere, it went quickly to her brain. And I think the Guru told her that this was about to happen, because she had given me some hints in the last year that her time on this earth was seemingly coming to a close. And up to that point, again, like I said, she was like many people, all of us, to some extent, fears of the unknown, fears of suffering, fear of death. And then all of a sudden, towards the end of her life, I think I give the power and the credit to the change and transformation in her, to the power of Kriya Yoga and how it can change her. About 3 weeks before she left the body, she couldn't stand up and she couldn't see, so she was very inward and quiet, and her brain was working and she was very aware. And I was wheeling her in the hospital on a wheelchair to have an MRI, just because the doctors had to do their due diligence, and which they did. And they said, okay, you have about 3 weeks. There's nothing you can do. And she already knew that, I think. But she was very quiet, and she could tell that I was very distraught over what was happening. And this whole time that we were doing this, she said not a word, and then she said about 10 words to me, which were very simple and very clear. She said, detach yourself, control the reactive process, live the teachings. And again, this is someone who, like all of us, had fears and karmas and shortcomings. And here, through the power and the grace of Kriya Yoga, and I think the grace of the Guru, she had overcome, I think, all the karma that she came to work out. And she was so free inside that she was only concerned about me. And even in her concern for me, she was extremely dispassionate in giving advice, almost like some ancient rishi, on their last breaths of life, giving the final advice very dispassionately and wisely to their friends and disciples. And I'm just going to touch on what my wife told me. Detach yourself, she said, which means detaching yourself from the emotions, from this entanglement in the world, yes, we do have to live in this world. We have to earn a living. Sometimes our jobs are stressful. But the gurus teach to keep a little bit of detachment. Don't get too caught up in the emotions. The second thing she said, this is what I'm going to talk about. She said control the reactive process. And this is something that Paramahansa Yoganandaji talked about very, very often. And it really gets to the essence of how Kriya Yoga can really change your life. Because this reactive process that Yoganandaji talked about is the tendency to react emotionally to events in life. And we all do this. Someone yells at us, we react negatively. We lose a job, or someone hurts us, or we get ill, or we experience pain. We react negatively. The energy goes down the spine is what the yogis teach. Then we hear some good emotional news. Someone pats us on the back and praises us, and we get a little bit energetic and a little more enthusiastic, but on an emotional level. The analogy I like to use is someone who buys a lottery ticket. You have the lottery here in India, where you buy tickets. Do they have that here too? It's like gambling. You buy a ticket, and you get some numbers, and you can win gazillions of dollars if you win. And so you look in the newspaper to see if you have the winning numbers. And suppose someone buys their ticket, they look in the newspaper, they have the winning numbers, they just won $10 million. And little spurts of energy go up the spine, you take a deep inhalation, and the reactive process is kicking in full stream in a very positively emotional way. And they get very emotional and giddy about it. They get very excited. And then they take a second look and they realize, oh, that's yesterday's newspaper, and I didn't really win after all. And the breath goes out, and they sigh, and the energy goes down. The reactive process, which is their reaction to an event, it causes the energy to go down the spine and pull them down. This is why you have the term, I'm feeling down, I'm feeling heavy. Because the energy in the spine, according to the yogis, is actually pulling us downward, and it's pulling us into a negative emotion. So what Kriya Yoga does, it gives one control of this reactive process. The way Swami Kriyanandaji put it, he said that our ups and downs in life, our joys, our sadnesses, they're not because of things that are happening out there, even though we give all the credit to that person or the circumstance. He says it's happening in here, in what the yogis call the astral spine. And in this astral spine, the energy is going up and down, sort of willy-nilly, and the event kind of controls us. And what it does is it controls the energy. And what Swamiji has taught us over all these years is that it's not the event that's making us happy. It's not the event that's making us sad. It's the energy in the astral spine. And so this is why great saints and masters can be in a state of divine bliss and divine freedom, no matter what is happening outside of themselves. They can go through great physical pain. They can go through rejection or persecution. They can be nailed up to a cross the way that Christ was. And because they have control of the reactive process, and they're not being a victim to the energy or the event pulling their energy down, they are able to lift the energy up the astral spine, united at the point between the eyebrows, the Kudashta Chaitanya, and experience yoga, divine union, and experience one's true nature, which is Sat Chit Ananda, divine bliss. And so Kriya Yoga gives one the power to be able to do this. This power is described by Patanjali in one of his 8 hymns as Pranayama, control of the life force. And so one learns how to control, over time, this energy in the astral spine, and to be able to meditate more easily, meditate much more deeply, be able to lift the energy up under all circumstances. This doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen inexorably through the daily practice of the techniques of Kriya Yoga and the other teachings that Ananda Sangha teaches. And I would say it happens inexorably and inevitably, because I can honestly say that without exception, people who I've seen who have stuck with it for many years have 100% success with these things as far as how it completely changes them. So this is a very practical way that meditation and Kriya Yoga can affect one's life. Because you have control over the reactive process and you can control your energy, you have control of the life force. We also see some other very interesting things with people who learn Kriya Yoga. they become better parents, they become better friends, they become better school teachers, they become better business people, they become better at everything because they're more centered, they have control of their emotions, and it's not that they become cold and unfeeling and dispassionate. They're actually, you'll find that people at Ananda are very engaging and very warm and a lot of laughter and a lot of joy, because Ananda does mean the divine joy, which is who and what we really are. And more than anything, I can say that that's what I've seen in myself and many others who practice these teachings of Kriya Yoga day in and day out over the years, is that they start to become more in touch with who and what they really are, which is, in the end, what the great saints and the scriptures teach is Satchit Ananda, ever conscious, ever existing, ever new divine bliss, as the way Yogananda translated that. And so the teachings of Kriya Yoga are very simple. They're not easy in the sense that one actually has to do them day in and day out. One can't have sort of the guru just do everything for you. One has to develop a daily practice, but it's not an onerous daily practice. It's very simple in the beginning, and you build on a natural progression. And our teachers, acharyas here with Ananda Sangha, do a beautiful job of explaining these practices, helping people develop a daily habit of meditation, integrating these things into one's life, developing the attitudes of kindness, self-offering that really almost generate themselves naturally from a daily practice of Kriya Yoga. We have a medical doctor who's been with Ananda for as long as I have. I think he and I came in about the same year. And he was one of the very first people to take part in a study on the effects of meditation on the brain. And nowadays that's very, very popular. But back in those days, in the late 1970s, doctors were still convinced that the human brain, you could not change it. You were born with a brain, and somewhere around the age of 20, basically the brain that you had was frozen. What was very interesting is that our guru, Paramahansa Yogananda, all the way back in the 1920s, was teaching that the brain is plastic, meaning that you can mold and change the brain simply by practicing meditation, affirmation, right attitudes, Kriya Yoga. And nowadays it's actually becoming finally accepted. It's proven, at least to the scientists. I think those of us at Ananda have known it all along. And this medical doctor, what he found was very interesting. He said that he didn't know about meditation, but he was taking part in studying these people who were meditators. It was part of the university that he was an intern at, I believe. And he said that he was very intrigued because he found that without exception, these long-time meditators that they were testing were always happy, cheerful, joyful. They were putting all these plugs in their head and shaving their head and having to wait for hours at a time while they tried to fix the equipment. And he said they were, without exception, they were very congenial, positive people. I thought, I can see that meditation changes people. Look at these people. I've never met people like this. You'll find that this is the state you'll see at Ananda Village and the Ananda centers when you see people practicing these things day in and day out. And he said that the study that they did found, in fact, that meditation changed the brain. And what he found was that, one, he was convinced to start meditating because of this, because he could see the changes in the people and in the brain patterns. But what he discovered was very interesting, something very specific. Because what meditation does is it stimulates and energizes and sends blood to the frontal lobes of the brain. And these frontal lobes is where qualities like kindness, compassion, intuition, artistic awareness, all these good qualities that are very human qualities, but in a way, I would say almost divine qualities. They're almost like the exalted human qualities. Well, when you send blood and you stimulate that part of the brain in these practices, this is what they do. This doctor started out as something of he wasn't an atheist, but he was probably agnostic, and he wasn't very devotional in a certain way. But he found over time that as he practiced Kriya Yoga, he started becoming more kind, more compassionate, more devotional towards God, more giving to others. And nowadays when you go to his rural clinic, which serves a lot of very, very tough people, people in the poor area, impoverished area, who have alcohol and drug problems, and in addition to the amount of people who he says are always tends to be healthier than the average because of their practices. And he's become almost a doctor saint in the way he gives to people and serves people. He gives the credit to the power that Kriya Yoga had to change him. He also has to deal with a whole lot of practical realities of being a medical doctor, serving thousands of people, having to deal with the government regulations and a large staff of probably 20 to 30 people. And at this time he started in a trailer, smaller than this stage up here. I was one of his patients when he was in a tiny little trailer and get all this sort of secondhand medical equipment. Now he has this vast clinic with dentists and mental health professionals. And it just, again, it's the power that Kriya Yoga has to change a person and enable them and empower them to become the best person that they can become. Which again is, I've seen this so many times that now that I'm used to it, I wouldn't say I take it for granted, because it's probably the greatest thing that we can do for ourselves, is to change ourselves so that we can become better at whatever it is that we're trying to achieve in life. And I can say, again, watching this grand experiment of Ananda over the years, that those who stay with it, practice 10, 20, 30, 40 years, it's quite extraordinary how it changes people. And you see, even in the beginning, people feel instant results the first weeks that they practice. If there's one change that you can make in your life that will probably be the most important change you can make, it would be one that changes you on every level, physically, mentally, and spiritually. In a way, in the beginning of a new year like we're having, we're still near the beginning of 2015. It's an opportunity to start a new pattern in your life. And so I would suggest at least researching, starting on this path of Kriya Yoga. There's some preliminary meditation techniques. We'll learn one tonight and just have a very short meditation that uses one of the techniques that is part of the path of Kriya. And it's probably the greatest change that you can make in yourself, is to establish a daily practice of meditation. Because you'll find, young, middle-aged, elderly, you can still change your brain. You can still change your attitudes. You can still change your tendencies, your samskars, the way that you've spent a lifetime being. I can say this again, talking about my wife. She overcame, through Kriya Yoga, all the greatest fears that she had in her life. And towards the end, again, she kept telling me, don't worry, saying to me, don't worry about her. She said, don't worry, I'm free. And she said that over and over again, which she was not prone to overstatement, believe me. She was this very sort of a staunch Russian personality that became extraordinarily softer and kinder and sweeter, more beautiful over the years. Again, through the power, the practice of Kriya Yoga. Her very last words were Om Guru to Yoganandaji. And again, if you see the before and after photos, in fact, I was looking at some photos not long ago of her and her sister when they had just emigrated from Russia. And it was really quite amazing to see how hard and hardened they looked. Because they were in the Soviet era where KGB would spy on people leading a yoga class, and one of the yoga teachers could get arrested and sent to prison, basically, for just the simplest things. And you learned to be very, very hard-edged and maybe cynical about the reality in the world. And really, the before and after, again, of Kriya Yoga, it really can change you in ways that are really quite extraordinary. Now, another component of the science of Kriya is that it helps one to become much more centered. Now, you see people who stay very calm and centered amidst all of life's conditions. And while other people are freaking out and getting emotional and some chaos is happening, you'll see there's always someone, or often someone, who's very calm and centered. Kriya Yoga also does this. And we know Kriya Yogis who work in hospital emergency rooms and other really extremely chaotic places like that. And they thrive in those places because they stay centered while other people are losing their heads and becoming very uncentered. So these practices are, like I said at the beginning, are extremely practical. Now, what we practice at Ananda Sangha is exactly as our Guru, Yoganandaji, gave it to his disciples. We're very true to our Guru, we're very true to his practices, we're very true to the way that we teach these things. The technique of Kriya is really just one part of it, even though that's the description in the autobiography of the yogi is sort of the most inspiring. What we practice here is we build a foundation of other techniques and practices. And we especially build a foundation of the daily spiritual meditation practice. And then we add the technique of Kriya Yoga on top of that after about 9 months to a year. And what we found is that when Kriya is placed on that really strong foundation, it very quickly and very instantly has a great deal of power to change people. So consider the possibilities, consider attending one of the Ananda Sangha classes. When we start teaching another level 1 class, there will probably be some announcements from literature explaining that, how that works, and when you can attend a class. The class is taught right here. They're taught elsewhere, but they are taught in Mumbai quite often, and there are many opportunities to learn these things. So, another thing that I just want to talk about, how Kriya, how meditation changes you. It changes people in a great, extraordinary way. It will actually, believe it or not, change the people around you. Because a lot of what Yoganandaji taught, and Swami Kriyananda over the years has taught us, is that so much of the change that you make in yourself has to do with your own magnetism. And the magnetism that one has essentially is the energy that you have. People who, you'll see that people who are very energetic have the power to affect those around them. Sometimes in bad ways. People who are negatively energetic have the power to affect people negatively. Someone who's in a really bad mood and screaming and upset and you're very emotionally close to the person, their magnetism really affects you in a very negative way. And what Kriya Yoga does, among other things, it changes your own personal magnetism. It makes it stronger, makes it more positive, makes it more spiritual, and it actually starts to affect the people around you on very subtle levels. I can't tell you how often over the years I've seen someone take up this practice of Kriya Yoga and meditation, and their spouse is very against it because the spouse maybe feels threatened, maybe they don't believe in these things, and they somehow find a way to do it in a non-threatening way. And they start meditating, they start practicing Kriya Yoga, they start practicing this path of devotion and self-offering and all these qualities that we talk about. And I've seen that inevitably their spouse, their partner, starts to be affected by this person's magnetism. They start to see that this person is actually starting to change. When I first moved to another village and started practicing these things, my own mother was so against it that she called someone up to see if they could kidnap me and take me away from another village because there was really weird people and they were doing these really weird things. And in America, these things are considered very, very strange back in 1977. And this person, I think, told my mother, oh, don't bother, or some such thing. Well, within about 3 years, I was visiting my mother one time for the second or third time in the intervening time. And she was so supportive and so positive of the change in me because she saw it and was so affected by it that she would tell me, well, tonight dinner is at 6:30, so that means you have to start your meditation at 5:30 here. And she was that supportive of, because she saw such an extraordinary change in me. Kriya Yoga has that power to change you in ways that those who are close to you will, their jaw will drop in awe sometimes to see the change, but it also has the magnetism to help change those you are close to. And it gives you, in a sense, also maybe the power and the spiritual authority to help change others, and not in a way of, standing on the mountaintop and proclaiming these great miracles and things, but just through your own nature changing, and just almost by the influence of your personality, your energy, and your magnetism. So I think we're going to practice a very simple technique right now. So let's start by sitting upright. One of the keys to raising the energy up to the point between the eyebrows is having a straight spine. This is why the physical posture yoga can be helpful, because it can release some of those knots in the spine. And what Yoganandaji taught is to sit with your shoulders slightly back and your chest forward, and put your hands palm upward in a sort of position of receptivity. And the chin parallel to the ground, eyes gently gazing upwards. And we're going to inhale with what Yoganandaji called double breath. It's a short and a long inhalation through the nose like this. Very deep breath, tense the body. Exhale with a double breath through the mouth. Inhale, tense the body. Exhale and relax. Once more, inhale and tense. Exhale and relax. And make sure the entire body is completely relaxed now. This tensing and relaxing is a very good way to release subconscious tension that we carry with us and we're not really aware of. So make sure the complete body is relaxed. And now we'll do a few rounds of deep measured breathing. Inhale deeply and slowly. Filling the lungs on top, bottom to top. Hold the breath. Exhale slowly. Again, inhale. Hold the breath. Exhale. Once more, inhale. Hold. Exhale. Now take a deep breath. Let the breath out. And when the breath comes in of its own accord, let the breathing process do what it will. And we are just going to watch or observe the breath as if somebody else were breathing. You can feel your breath in your lungs, or you can feel it going through your nostrils. Just be aware of the sensation of breathing. And again, we're not controlling the breath. We're just observing or feeling it. And again, make sure the eyes are gazing upward and the body is relaxed. If restless thoughts come into the mind, just let them pass through and go on their way. Don't fight them, but also don't give them any energy or indulge in them. Just let them pass through and bring one's attention back to the breathing. And now we're going to add a mantra that goes with the breath. As you inhale, mentally chant Hong, H-O-N-G, a long drawn out Hong, as long as the inhalation is coming in. And when you exhale, mentally chant Sa, S-A-U, long drawn out Sa, as long as the exhalation is going. Again, we're not controlling the breath, we're letting it do whatever it likes. We're just observing it. Mentally chanting Hong during the inhalation, Sa during the exhalation. If any thoughts enter, just go back to more of a focused attention on the mantra and the breath. And we'll practice this with deep attention for a few minutes. And now let's end our practice by inhaling with a full breath. Let the breath out. And forget the technique and forget the breath. And just observe and feel the deep stillness that you feel. And let's take that into some form of deep inner communion with some aspect of the divine. This is what Yoganandaji really described as meditation, which is absorption in some aspect of the divine. And you can offer your heart's natural feeling of devotion, self-offering, upwards to the point between the eyebrows, to the form of God that you worship. You can quietly pray. Yoganandaji said that the spiritual eye between the eyebrows is the sending station to God, and that the heart is the receiving station. And so let's just feel in our hearts a bit of joy or bliss, or the awareness of divine presence there. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. So it's just a very slight taste of Kriya meditation in a way. And I hope people felt some positive sensations from that. What Yoganandaji taught is that the techniques of meditation, in a way, they're a vehicle for helping us to really commune with the divine. Meditation, like I said, divine meditation has conscious communion, concentration, eventually absorption in some aspect of God, whether you worship God as Satchit Ananda, as Krishna, whatever form that one worships God. Meditation, by Yogananda's definition, and that's how we use the word at Ananda Sangha, is conscious communion with that aspect of the divine within ourselves. And what happens over time, and this I think really is why Kriya Yoga changes people the most deeply, is because through that regular daily practice of inner communion, one starts to become transformed by divine grace. And it's really the process of meditation balances both the science of meditation and the art of meditation. It's a combination of these two different elements. The science is the technique. It has to do with things like developing willpower and energy, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And the art is the intuitive side of it, of listening, of communing. I've heard someone say that prayer is talking to God, meditation is listening to God. And so meditation is conscious inner communion, like I said, with some aspect of the divine. And over time, this, more than anything, changes your brain, changes your heart, changes your attitude. It really helps one become a much better person. Now, there's another aspect of this science which is really integral to what Yoganandaji taught. And this is to develop energy and willpower. Because you'll see that people who are successful in any area of life, whether it be business, the arts, athletics, they have a lot of energy. They have a lot of willpower. And willpower is not something that we're given a certain amount of when we're born, and that's all we're stuck with that through our whole life. Yoganandaji said that willpower is like a muscle that you can exercise and practice with and develop, and that you can, through these exercises that he taught, called the energization exercises, you can, over time, develop more willpower and energy. You also, as a sort of a byproduct of these exercises, you also learn to develop more control of the energy, and you can learn to direct the life force to different parts of your body, to start controlling your thought processes with these exercises. And so these exercises that he gave us develop physical, mental, spiritual energy. They develop especially willpower. And these exercises, the way they work is that they use willpower, and they do work with some different physical motions and tensing and relaxing and these things. But they especially develop and use the willpower muscle. And you'll find that people, like I said, who have success in any area of life, they have a lot of willpower. Yoganandaji had so much energy that when he would come out on the lecture platform, he would come running out, his hair would be flying behind him, and he would be shouting. He had that much energy and enthusiasm, just that life force naturally makes one more enthusiastic. And you can develop this. You can overcome challenges like being moody and negative and downcast by using the antidote, which is developing energy and enthusiasm. Now that's part of the science of the path of meditation. The other part is the meditation techniques. The one we practice to reach is sort of a watered down version of the Hong Sau technique. But there are other techniques that make sort of a package that Yoganandaji taught that we practice and learn in our classes here with Ananda Sangha. And what they do is that they help us to develop this deep stillness, calmness, control of the life force, and allows us to be able to work more with the art of meditation. This art and science of meditation is very interesting because what I've seen with people who succeed with meditation, they really work with both of them, not as separate entities. Here's the science, here's the science of technique, meditation techniques, energy techniques, and over here is devotion and intuition and those things. We work on both of them, but we actually, what Yoganandaji taught, is actually the marriage of science, technique, with the art. And a good way to look at this, I use this analogy a lot because it's so perfect and it's so easily seen. There's a friend of mine at Ananda Village in California who is a master cello player. He literally has studied under cello masters over the years, some of the great cellists in the world. And he's become a great cello player himself. He plays in symphony orchestras. He is a teacher himself now of many years. And when you watch him play the cello, you see someone who is able to express through music, through the playing of the cello, the deepest feelings of inspiration, of joy, of sensitivity, and you just feel his consciousness coming through this musical instrument in a way that's very inspiring and enlightening to watch. And what he's done over the years, and you can see when he plays, is that he's combined the science and the art in the same way that yogis combine the science and art of meditation. You can tell that his fingering of the cello and the way he uses the bow are extraordinarily expert. And you can tell that he has done exercises day in and day out for many, many, many years until the technique becomes very natural. And because the technique is natural, he's able to express his inspiration, his enthusiasm, the quality of the piece of music, the emotion of the music, seamlessly and effortlessly. And so he's combined both art and science, both feeling and technique. And this is how Yoganandaji taught the path of Kriya Yoga. And again, there's a passage in the Gita where Krishna describes this exactly the way that Yogananda taught it, which is that he tells Arjuna to practice these yoga teachings and offer his heart's devotion and feelings to the Lord. And he's talking about these both at the same time. And in a way, for the yogi, the spine and the body are almost like a musical instrument. And that when you work with these energy techniques, these meditation techniques that work with the physical body and what Yoganandaji called the astral spine, that over time you're able to express divine qualities and divine feelings and moods and clarity and all these things through the instrument of the body. And so what Yoganandaji taught, he said that we are made in the image of God, that these human bodies are divine. Sometimes when you look in the mirror in the morning, you look at it and it doesn't look all that divine first thing every day. But in fact, when you practice meditation regularly every day, you start to feel divine joy coursing through your body cells. And actually, even on a physical level, you feel this divine energy flowing through you. And you understand that the human body really is, in a sense, a divine instrument. And the techniques of meditation, the techniques of yoga, help us to be aware of those energies. They help us to control those energies. But again, they also help us with the art, with the devotion, with the sensitivity, with the feeling, and sort of merge it and marry these qualities into an integrated whole. And I think one of the things that it does, probably, if they studied it enough, is that it also probably takes the left and right sides of the brain, which have different focuses. One is more critical thinking, the other one is more intuitive, creative thinking, and I think it probably sort of creates these pathways in the brain that helps one also become more integrated. Because you see this with the Kriya yogis at Ananda, you see they become more balanced in life over time. You see that someone who maybe started out as a very macho male person develops, I wouldn't say female qualities, but ones that are traditionally thought of, which is devotion and kindness. And you see that the women at Ananda Village become very strong in addition to also being kind and devotional. And it's very interesting watching Ananda Village over the years because we have as many men as women in leadership roles at Ananda because one, when you practice meditation, you less and less identify with yourself as I am this type of person, I am an angry person, I am a kind person, I am this or that. You start identifying yourself with the divine. You sort of lose this little sort of rigid, small self-identification that you had at one time maybe start to become more expansive in the way that you think, in the way that you behave, and you start to actually lose some of these sort of negative qualities that we all want to lose. So I think at this point I'm going to, for a bit, open it up for questions that people might have. And maybe just raise your hand if you have a question, stand up. And we have a microphone here that Ayush will bring to you if you do have a question. So any question that I talked about or anything you would like me to talk about more this evening, we still have plenty of time here. So there must be a few questions out there. There's one.
Good evening. So, a number of times I've heard that should we mix the meditation practices? So, for example, if I'm doing Vipassana and at the same time if I start doing Kriya Yoga, so practicing two techniques, different techniques together, is it advisable? Should that be done or not?
Yeah, so he's asking about doing different techniques and paths at the same time. You know, I would say that in the beginning it's good to sort of shop around and try different things. So yeah, the beginning is okay to test out different things and maybe compare them. But I would say in the end, going deep into one path is really where you're going to go a lot further on the spiritual path. And I'm not saying only on our path will you go real far. I'm saying that any true spiritual path, in the end, if you go really deep into that one thing, you'll go much further. And a good analogy is that to go to the top of the mountain, you have to take a single path all the way up. If you sort of go for half a mile and then go backwards and go up another path and keep trying different things, you'll never get to the top. But at some point, going really deep in one way will take you a lot further. Swami Kriyanandaji has used the analogy of trying to break through ice, you know, like on a river. That if you break through at one point with an ice pick, you'll get through the ice and down the water rather than just trying to punch it out all over in different places. So, but in the beginning, yeah, it's good to kind of work with different things and try out different things. And I would say, to some extent, use your own intuition of what resonates with you the most, and then really, really go deep into that. And that's where I've seen the success with people of all different kinds of spiritual paths. It's one of the beautiful things over the years of meeting people from other traditions who have spent 20, 30, 40 years in a particular tradition. You see you're on the same part of the mountain as them, even though you've taken different routes up, because they have some very deep spiritual qualities that they've developed through those practices. And I would say part of it is not just the practice, but the teacher. You know, I think for those who follow the path of Kriya Yoga, if you really have a real deep connection to Yoganandaji as your teacher, then it can take you very far, or another tradition also. Any other questions? Go back there, and then next is up here.
Good evening, my name is Devarshi. Actually, I wanted to request you for just briefing about the chakras of what connection chakras have with the meditation.
Yeah.
I have been into this. In fact, someone told me about last 1 month, more than 1 month. And as you said, I have also noticed some positive changes in even my family members has also. I wanted to know more about.
Okay.
And the second thing is how to control the energy which is generated when you are going step by step with.
Okay, I didn't hear the question, so Ayush, could you make it more clear what he said?
He said that he's been practicing some teachings of Yoganandaji for the last month or so.
Yeah.
He's been practicing Kriya Yoga for the last month. But he wants a further elaboration on 2 points. One is that specific to the chakras.
Yeah.
So you can elaborate more on the chakras in general, I think, and
Yeah.
the relationship of chakras to the path of Kriya.
Yeah.
And the second one, I think, what I understood was how do you control, what is the relationship between energy, the flow of energy and the chakras?
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah. And he's asking about the chakras. And yeah, it's an integral part of the teachings of Kriya Yoga. What the yogis teach is that we are trying to bring the energy up to the point between the eyebrows, unite it, the energy from the bottom of the spine, bring it up, and that is yoga or divine union, as Yoganandaji often expressed it. The problem is that there are these blockages along the way, which are the chakras, and it's not that they're blockages so much, it's more that when we get caught in Maya or delusion, we get engaged through emotions, let's say, depending on the type of desire or attachment that's catching us, there's energy flowing down the spine and out through one of the chakras. You know, if it's the heart center, if it's in personal, emotional attachment or upset. Maybe it's the third chakra at the navel, which when reversed inward and offered up to the point between the eyebrows, it's represented by Arjuna in the Mahabharata as a symbolic form of fiery self-control. When we are trying to control others, or when we have loss of control, there's energy going down and out through that chakra. And so as we're trying to bring the energy up the spine, it's hitting these strong flows of energies that are going outward. And so it's difficult to get the energy past that point, or all of it, and it gets caught in that outward flow and just gets caught and goes outward into even more worldly involvement. So part of the path of Kriya Yoga and yoga practices is to spiritually energize or awaken the chakras. Now, I use this word, awaken chakras, with some caution, because some teachers out there, when they use that phrase, they're talking about just jazzing the chakras and indulging in all the different chakras and their energy and just letting yourself go and get caught up in it. In fact, spiritualizing the chakra reverses that flow and offers it up to the point between the eyebrows. Now, I'll use just an example of this. Devotional chanting, when done right, and Yoganandaji had a slightly different way of working with kirtan and devotional chanting. His way of working with chanting was more inward. Yes, it would start out with very loud and expressive devotional chanting of God's name in some way, but then it would get quieter and quieter and more interiorized. And what that form of devotional chanting does is that it takes the energy that's tending to go out in sort of devotion to the world and the outward things, and it reverses that flow and takes our heart's feelings and offers it up to the point between the eyebrows. So in some way, almost all yoga techniques, either directly or indirectly, including the yoga postures, and also even just developing right attitudes, they work with the chakras. Now, there's also some techniques that we practice with Ananda Sangha that more directly work with the chakras. But it's with that end in mind of spiritually magnetizing them and taking that awakened energy and bringing it up to the point between the eyebrows. Swami Kriyanandaji said also that Kriya Yoga, it takes one of the ways that Kriya Yoga hastens one's spiritual progress, and this is getting into the more subtle aspects of it. Yoganandaji said that our past karmas, our past desires, anytime we have a desire or an action, it creates a vritti, or a little whirlpool of energy in the astral spine. And we have billions of these karmas. If we knew how many we had, we would probably shudder to know how much there is there from past actions. But these vrittis also tend to catch the energy and block it. And Yoganandaji said that Kriya Yoga, by introducing a very strong current of energy in the astral spine, starts to dissolve and dissipate these vrittis. And these vrittis have a lot of energy caught up in them. Swamiji one time said that's why we tend to feel so stupid all the time, because all this energy is caught up in all these vrittis from many, many lifetimes of energizing desires and attachments. And so Kriya Yoga dissolves these vrittis and releases energy to rise up the spine. And this is why one reason why Kriya Yogis tend to be more joyful, because as that energy is released, it rises upward and actually releases a feeling of divine joy. So does that help answer your question? Okay, and those.
I think that is the second step.
What's that?
I think what you are trying to say is that this concentrating on the chakras is the second step.
Yeah.
You can start with the things which you are doing. Start with chanting mantras, and start meditation, and go to the
Yeah. Yeah, and the techniques that work with Kriya do work on all the levels, working with the flow of energy, but also working with the chakras themselves. Okay, there's a question down here.
This is rather a personal question. Now, when you started practicing Kriya, how long did it take you for the Kundalini to arouse and leave Muladhara and Shakchakra Vedan and then ultimately
Just wait just a second, I can't hear you while this plane is passing over.
Good. Yeah, I mean, this is a personal question.
Yeah, I heard the first part.
So how long it took you in order to awaken your Kundalini? Because in any path, it's my understanding, the Kundalini has to be aroused.
Yes.
And it can happen, as you said, by devotional, side by side, by technology.
Yeah.
Right? I think myself, I have found that first you sing, first you sing, and that in a way makes your mind little quieter. So when I see the harmonium, is it that first you sing and then do the Kriya?
Yeah.
Sadhana. So how long did it take
Well,
you for the Kundalini?
yeah, so the question, how long did it take me for the Kundalini to arise? And I have had awakenings over the years, several awakenings over the years where, the Swami Kriyanandaji and our Guru Yoganandaji, the way they expressed it is that whenever you have a deep experience of God as divine joy, as devotion, as deep calmness, as light, cosmic sound, that the Kundalini is awakening, and that's why you're experiencing these things. And I would say probably for most Kriya yogis, their experience is probably similar to mine, which is that over time, even in the very beginning, you have some very profound experiences of this. And the goal over time is to be in complete control of that. And in a way, those early experiences are almost like signposts, signs telling you, you're going in the right direction, keep going with this. And over time, I found in my own sadhana life that it becomes more and more easy to feel divine bliss, to feel deep awareness of different aspects of the divine within myself. And it's not so much as some grand, huge, gigantic explosion of Kundalini. Kriya Yoga, the way it awakens it, is very natural and very, it's very continuous and natural and balanced. Because sometimes people have Kundalini awakenings and they're not prepared for them, and maybe the body and the mind are not prepared, and it makes them go kind of crazy, and because they're not really quite ready for them. The Kriya is very balanced and very natural, I've seen, and doing it naturally over time in a way that is very consistently more and more over the years, is my experience. And yes, we do devotional chanting before we sit down to meditate. This is something Yoganandaji very much advised, simply as a way of engaging the heart's natural love and engaging the feelings. This is part of the art of meditation, is to awaken devotion. The way he put it, that Kriya plus devotion, technique, technology. I love the use of the word technology to describe the techniques of yoga, because in a way they really were the original technology of how to change ourselves. Technology simply means a practice or something that is used for a particular means to an end. And the techniques of yoga are extraordinary technology for this. And so devotional chanting is part of that, actually, and it's the combination of that awakened devotion combined with technique. Because in the end, we find that, and I've seen this more and more, that when we do a technique with devotion, it really combines using will and focus to awaken and lift the energy up but also self-offering offers that energy up. If one uses just technique to awaken Kundalini, one has to be very careful. The way that Swamiji has put it is that there are some forceful techniques, energy techniques and yoga techniques, just by technique, but without developing the right attitude and devotion, can awaken Kundalini and kind of force it to awaken. But that one can't keep the energy raised or uplifted without devotion and right attitude. And then what happens is the energy falls. And the way Swamiji has put it, it's a very hard fall, because one has spiritual experiences, and then the energy goes down because you can't keep it up without devotion and right attitude. And so one loses that awakening, and it becomes very difficult. And this is what you see when people who have Kundalini awakenings that they aren't prepared for, because they forced the issue. Whereas Kriya tends to be very balanced and harmonious in the way it does it.
But I didn't know how much time it took you.
How much time? I'm not going to talk too much personally about myself, but my own path, I was in high school when I had my first experience of deep, overwhelming divine bliss. And I think I was fortunate to have some spiritual sanskars. And like I said earlier, I had read a book or two about yoga, but I knew right away that this is what the yogis were talking about as Satchit Ananda, and what the Christian saints that I was reading about were talking about as God. And I knew that this was what I was going to give my life to. So I've had such awakenings throughout my sadhana. There have been long times in the sort of the dry middle years where it was more difficult and dry, and I think God and the Guru test the sincere devotee with some dry spells and say, are you wanting this practice just for what you're getting out of it, or are you going to give it to me unconditionally and give me your love and learn to develop giving in a way? Because it's sort of a strange conundrum on the spiritual path that I've discovered, which is that when we get onto the spiritual path, we come onto it because of what we're going to get out of it. But at a certain point, it's almost like God says, okay, now we're going to turn the tables, and what can you give? And you find that as long as you're thinking of yourself and what I'm getting out of it, there's some self-involvement and contraction. But that is what gets people onto the path in the first place. But over time, you'll find if you look at the lives of the saints and the masters, and those who are completely free, you don't think of them so much in terms of what they got out of the deal. You think of them in terms of what they gave, the divine love they gave, the way that they helped people. This has been my experience with reading about the life of Yogananda, knowing Swami Kriyanandaji for about 35 years and having many close personal experiences with him. And so, in the end, it's about giving love, giving seva, giving service to others, giving kindnesses to others. And in that giving and expansion, one really becomes even freer yet. And so the long-term spiritual path has a lot of unusual twists and turns. And I think God and the Guru at times will withhold themselves from us until we learn a particular lesson. So it's not just about awakening Kundalini and being all in a straight line. Even though the spine is a straight line, a friend of mine likes to say that the spiritual path is really, really short. We think it's really, really long, but it's only about 30 inches long. It's from the base of the spine up to the spiritual eye. But in fact, in the process one goes through, there are a lot of unusual adventures, twists and turns on the spiritual path, doubts. People go through doubts when maybe they aren't experiencing those awakenings for a while. I think every great saint and master has gone through a lot of these things, partly as an example to all of us, and partly it's just the way that it works. It so much depends in the end on the grace of God. That's the 50% that Yogananda described. Our part is simply to give ourselves to the process, practice with diligence, with energy, with devotion, practice service to others, and in due time, these things will all happen inevitably, and that's what I've seen. And that's depending on the different people with different karma. It can take shorter, longer, depending on the person, but they do happen inevitably. Our part is just to enter into that process and give the results to God. One time, Swami Kriyanandaji was practicing meditation in his very early years when he was with his guru, And he was tending to practice with a lot of intensity and a lot of willpower and a little bit too much tension because he was thinking too much about the results. And Yogananda told him, he said, see meditation as karma yoga, as a practice of nishkama karma, where you go in the process, where you practice these things without being attached to the results and thinking, being too caught up in what the results are. The results will come inevitably, and our part is just to do the practices and the attitudes the way that we've been taught. I know it's not a very direct answer to your question.
It's my understanding that when the Shakti is awakening, at that time I'm in such a great, how many thousand watts kind of a battery, you know, that they say it's very difficult for a person to, bear it. And I'm asking you, how did you, what was your experience about it?
Yeah, I've had a few experiences where I was so overwhelmed that I could not function for a while in real life. But one of the beautiful things in Autobiography of the Yogi, when Yogananda describes in that chapter my experience in cosmic consciousness, we remember that chapter is really interesting for so many reasons. One is that he was meditating very restlessly when his guru called him down. And so it was that time when his guru touched him on the chest and actually granted him that experience of samadhi, of divine union. So that's very interesting in itself. He was in the middle of a restless meditation, which shows that God can come at any time. Our part is just to try our best and keep putting ourselves out there. And again, practicing meditation is a form of nishkama karma. But remember, Yoganandaji had that experience of cosmic consciousness, and he was rooted to the ground. He couldn't move. His sight, as he put it, was 360 degrees. He was omnipresent. And he wrote that poem, Samadhi, describing the galaxies and, as he called it, glaciers of silent x-rays and just the cosmos in just the most extraordinary way. And when he was finished with that experience, his guru, Sri Teshwar, gave him a broom and said, it's time to sweep the porch. And that was his way of saying is that you can't be greedy and just hold this experience for yourself. You still have a body, as Sri Teshwar very rightly put it. He said, as long as you're breathing the free air of this world, you're obligated to render grateful service in some way. And then he added, those who are too good for this world are adorning some other. And so we do have to also be practical and come down from the great experiences and give to others, sweep the porch, find a way to actually apply these things in our daily life. So again, those experiences can be extraordinarily overwhelming, but we also have to find a way to integrate it into our daily life. For most people, I think there's a few people who they go into bliss, and that just that's the expression that God decided to have with them. And they, like Ananda was one such great saint who did not express it outwardly herself in very practical ways. She was in these states of bliss all the time, and people had to feed her and such. That's very rare to have a whole life like that. But it's not rare to have experiences like that, and then sort of come back to earth, sweep the porch, and find a way to actually apply divine bliss in daily life and share with others, as all of us at Ananda Sangha do with teaching meditation and encouragement and working with others. So, again, not a direct answer, but the best that I could do.
We've got a question here at the back.
Okay.
Can you tell me what is the right diet for a Kriya yogi and how important is vegetarianism or vegetarianism?
Yeah, that's a good question. What's the right diet for a Kriya yogi and how important is vegetarianism? I've been a vegetarian since I was in high school, and it was just more because that was my own inclination. Yoganandaji wasn't strict about vegetarianism. He said it's more healthy. It also enables one to meditate more easily, because most animals, when they are killed, there's some fear in them, and there's some, not just vibrations of fear, but it actually releases things into the flesh, their bodies as they're dying, and that you pick up on those vibrations as you eat many forms of animal. In the Americas, it was very beautiful, some of the traditions of the Native Americans, because they would, when they killed an animal, because they eat meat, but they would follow a deer, for example, and they would ask the soul of the deer, are you ready to offer yourself? And they would make it a spiritual, part of their spiritual practice to tune in to the consciousness of the animal and kill it in a way that it didn't have fear, and they would give back their prayer and life force to the sort of the deva of the deers. And so there is a way to do it more spiritually. But Yoganandaji was not strict about it. He was not fanatical about it. He advised his close disciples, go in the direction towards vegetarianism. Don't make it your religion. Don't make food your religion. One of his very advanced disciples, Dr. Lewis, who was a very advanced Kriya yogi, he was going vegetarianism and he was having some health problems. And the guru said to him, you might be better off eating meat one day a week. I think you would balance your body in a certain way, and it did. So he would eat meat once a week. So you don't want to make it one's total religion, but eating lightly, eating foods that are easily digestible, that have a lot of prana and life force, fresh fruits, vegetables, nuts, is what Swami Sri Yukteswar recommended. It can help support one's meditation practice. Eating a lot of sugar and very heavy food and a lot of meat, it makes it more difficult to feel lightness in your consciousness and in your being. So on an individual level, it's good to work in that direction, but not to be thumping the Bible and proclaiming that everyone should become a vegetarian. One of the most wonderful sayings or teachings of Jesus Christ, he said one time, and I think it was applied to people who get too fanatical about food and start trying to convert everyone to their own particular food fad. He said, what comes out of your mouth is a lot more important than what goes into it. And so he was saying that kindness and love and things that you express are a whole lot more important than the food you eat. But it can help support one in meditation practice and Dhyana. So I would say try to work more as a direction towards more life force, more lightness, less sugars. But it's going to be a little different for everyone. People say that there's one diet that's the best for everyone. People have different constitutions. In Ayurveda, they talk about Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. And Swami Sri Yukteswar, almost his entire advice about diet, he said, find a diet that's suitable to your constitution and stick with it. And he left it as simple as that. And it's going to be a little different for everyone, depending on their constitution. But that's about the best food advice I've ever heard. Find a diet suitable to your constitution and stick with it.
Okay, let's have two more questions. I think we have one here.
How Kriya Yoga helps in enhancing the emotional quotient?
How it helps with the emotions?
Yes, emotional EQ, emotional quotient, or maybe emotional intelligence, or whatever you mean.
The emotional which?
The emotional quotient.
The emotional quotient.
Yeah, how does Kriya Yoga help one develop?
That's a good question because I talked about the reactive process, which really is an emotional reaction to life. And Swami Kriyanandaji, the way I put it earlier, he said it's not about what's out there, it's about what's in here. And it's our emotional reactions to things, which really means that we don't have control of the energy going up and down. And so Kriya Yoga tends to make one more calm and balanced. It doesn't make one cold, because we don't want to just become cold and unfeeling. But it tends to give us more, I wouldn't even say positive emotions, because I think people spend too much time in their life seeking the high of more outward emotions. And you see people living a roller coaster of intense feeling and emotion and kind of really indulging it. And there's always the balance of duality that pulls one down. What I have seen in myself with Kriya Yoga is that it does tend to make one experience more, I would say, divine emotions, divine feelings, in the sense of divine joy, divine kindness, compassion, those kinds of feelings, and especially joy, even in the midst of suffering. I had an experience where I was, going through a period of very intense chronic pain, and it would happen quite often, and the pain was enough that it would have me on my back. I would not only be feeling intense pain, it had sort of a migraine component, but also nausea and dizziness, and I couldn't do my usual sort of fallback options of meditating and even sitting up and just trying to do something positive because my mind was affected by it. And I found that in the beginning, yes, I would react emotionally to pain, the way that we all tend to, and the way that we've trained ourselves to, and sort of experience either fear or this isn't pleasant, I wish it would go away. And I found by working with positive emotions, working with devotion especially, and working with tuning into the divine, that the intense pain actually turned to very intense and extreme divine joy. And that to me is about the greatest testimonial to the power of Kriya Yoga. Because I'm not one that's sort of inured to pain. It's not been my nature, but I found that these practices could help me even turn a negative emotion and feeling into an extremely positive one. And it's because it gives us control of the life force. I don't think I could have done that 35 years ago, before I had the control I had developed through daily practice of Kriya Yoga.
There's one last question. I'll come on that side because this side has been required.
Good evening. My question is a bit more gentle. Is it true that people come newly on the spiritual path, that life has more difficult and they are tested with different circumstances? Is that a general thing which happens to people who come on the spiritual path?
You're asking if it's a general thing on the spiritual path that suddenly life gets more difficult. No, that's a good question, because it's difficult to answer yes or no. I don't always see that, because sometimes people like learn Kriya Yoga, and occasionally I'll hear people who got initiated in the Kriya technique. They'll start saying, oh, all kinds of stuff came up after I started learning Kriya Yoga. But I don't hear that all the time. And so I don't think the Kriya Yoga is responsible for that. That said, I think for one thing, when you get on the spiritual path, sometimes our determination is tested. God wants to see how serious are you about this. So I think sometimes it attracts that particular test. Sometimes I think also that as we start experiencing deeper states and we start getting a taste of what's possible, that what we used to experience as normal suddenly becomes very unpleasant. And it seems like a test because we know what really the potential is, we know how we should be, we know how life should be, and all of a sudden we realize that what we sort of gotten used to by not having very high standards for life, that all of a sudden those things seem like tests. A person seems like a really bad test when maybe we were kind of used to it before. So sometimes it does happen that tests come. What I have seen especially with Kriya Yoga, is that it gives you the power to overcome your tests. And one time a man at Ananda was going through a lot of tests, a lot of karma and attachments, and I think it had to do maybe with substance abuse and alcohol. And he asked Swami Kriyanandaji, should I be doing less Kriya Yoga during this time? Because he was afraid he was stirring things up. And Swamiji, his response was very interesting. He said, no, you should be doing more Kriya Yoga. Because, he didn't explain it, but I know what the reason was, is that it gives us more and more control over ourselves. It makes us more centered. And so it may be that sometimes there are more tests, but you'll find that these practices also give you more of an ability to overcome tests. And I can say over the long term, seeing people who've been practicing Kriya for many years, and my wife was one example, but among many, that the most difficult, challenging tests that we could possibly imagine, Kriya Yoga gives us the power to overcome and transcend. And so at a certain point, I think you stop worrying about the tests. The tests are going to come, but through the grace of God and through the help of a guru and through pranayama and control, I'm able to overcome more and more of the tests. So, again, I don't give very many direct answers, do I, to these questions? But Kriya Yoga is direct because it takes us probably more directly than anything towards this divine inner freedom that we've been talking about. So any more questions, or are we running out of time? Or we should end, they say, okay. So Sangha here, Jamal will make a few announcements about the classes given by Ananda Sangha. And it's my joy to be here sharing with people. I'm visiting India right now, just in the middle of about a 2-month visit. But then I'll be going back to another village in California and preparing over the next few months to leave everything behind and move permanently to India. So I'll be living at the Ananda ashram in Gurgaon and working mostly in the NCR area, but also be traveling to Mumbai, Pune, and our other centers probably about 2 times a year. So I hope to see more of you in the coming many years. May the grace of God and the Master be with us all.